I know there's a lot more questions. Teju is very generously agreed. It was going to be a breakout session over lunch in Olin 202, just upstairs. And if you want to have a more small group opportunity to talk to him during lunch, that will happen then. Please now, I'm going to welcome up the next panel on. Yeah. What? Oh yeah. First, there's music. We're going to have a short musical interlude, and then the next panel coming up on joy, gratitude, and transcendence. So it'll start right after the music.
But just so you know, at the time I'm doing the breakout session at 1 o'clock, there's also the Brad Comedy Club. Oh, that was canceled?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm the only show in town, sorry.
The only show in town. All right, that was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was great.
Thank you.
Excellent, yeah.
So it is a great audience.
It is.
It's a super audience.
And I hope you had a good time. It's always great to have you here. Are you you're staying for tomorrow or not?
Yeah.
That would be great. It's just like a 2-minute music and then the next thing. Hey, Karen. Good to see you. All right, if Anthony Kronman and Matthew Crawford are here, could you please come up? Anthony and Matthew? Are they here? Let's see. So Karen, you can go till... Matthew and Tony, are you here?
We're short of the panelists.
What?
Anthony Kronman.
What? I've met them. Yeah.
Okay, it's on. Okay. Oh. Maybe we can get started if people want to settle down. Okay. Okay. I'm just waiting for people to take their seats. All right. So I think we're going to be starting now. That's okay. All right. So I would like to welcome everyone here to this morning's panel on joy and gratitude in transcendence. My name is Karen Sullivan. I am the Irma Brandeis Professor of Romance, Literature, and Culture here at Bard College. I am a medievalist, and I've written several books at the intersection of medieval literature, history, and religion. We will be having two speakers this morning, each of whom will talk for about 12 minutes. The speakers will then have an opportunity to respond to each other, and I will be offering some thoughts on their remarks. We will then open the floor to questions and answers. I hope we're going to have plenty of time for that. So our first speaker, Anthony Kronman, is Sterling Professor of Law at Yale Law School, where he teaches courses on constitutional law, contracts, legal philosophy, and law and religion. His most recent book, After Disbelief, explores the meaning of God in an age of disenchantment. Other books address the challenges being faced by higher education today. In his book, The Assault on American Excellence, Professor Kronman decries the ways in which the consuming passion for diversity and the erosion of free speech undermine educational values in the country at large. A third book's argument is reflected by its very title, Education's End: Why Our Colleges and Universities Have Given Up on the Meaning of Life. Throughout these books and other writings, Professor Kronman addresses the spiritual and academic predicaments with which this country is confronted. Our second speaker, Matthew Crawford, was trained both as a physicist and as a political philosopher. He is currently a senior fellow at the Institute for Advanced Studies in Culture at the University of Virginia. He has published 3 books, all of which take advantage of his own experience as an electrician, a mechanic, and the one-time owner of a motorcycle shop, and all of which make the case for the competence of ordinary people. In his book, Shop Class as Soulcraft, Professor Crawford reevaluates the concept of skilled manual labor and its relation to knowledge work. In his book, The World Beyond Your Head, he contrasts what is often considered to be our, quote, age of distraction with the intense capacity for concentration still found in people like ice hockey players and short-order cooks. Finally, in Why We Drive, he champions the American enthusiasm for driving cars, especially in the face of a future of Uber rides and self-driven cars. So please join me in welcoming Professor Kronman and Professor Crawford.
Thank you, Karen. The times may or may not be dark, but the day outside our drawn curtains is as brilliantly bright as any day I can imagine. To be on this beautiful campus in October weather, gathered to talk about a series of interlocking themes and questions, I can't imagine anything more rewarding on earth. I'm thrilled to be a part of it and was grateful for the invitation. If the word joy means anything at all, it denotes a state or condition or an experience different from the one to which the word happiness refers. Indeed, not only different from it, but in certain respects, opposed to it. Happiness is an everyday thing. It is the most familiar thing we know. If we're at all lucky, we have a bit of happiness in our lives every day, and a bit of unhappiness too, which is as ordinary as happiness itself. All happy moments share 2 characteristics in common. One, obviously, is that they don't last. They come and they go. The other is that even while they do last, they are tinged by an awareness that they won't. Even in our happiest moments, the shadow of their transience hovers over us. This is the sadness at the heart of happiness. Joy is something different. Joyful moments, states, experiences may be short-lived as well, but while they last, there is no sadness in them. That is because the sense of the inevitable passing of things, which shapes and shadows all our happy moments, is missing from the experience of joy. It's what makes it joyful. Put more positively, joy is the experience of what time cannot undo, what doesn't come into being or pass away, what doesn't have a mortal career, but lasts forever, of what endures, of what Aristotle called, in his characteristically laconic way, the eternal and divine. Is joy, the experience of joy, so understood, possible for us in this life, in this world? Augustine, whose name has already been mentioned, said no. Augustine was an important figure for Hannah Arendt, and beyond that, of course, a seminal figure in the entire civilization of the West. Augustine said at the beginning of his great work, The City of God, "We are merely pilgrims passing through this life. The world is not our home. That lies elsewhere, beyond this life, beyond this world, with God, in the bosom of God, where we will one day, God willing, know eternal happiness and peace." Those who view the world as their home, who settle down in it and find their fulfillment here, woe unto them, says Augustine. They are the children of pride, the citizens of the city of man. They are doomed because they mistakenly believe that the highest satisfaction for which we may reasonably hope is to be found here on earth in the company of other living human beings. To this rather severe Augustinian view, another may be contrasted. For the sake of convenience, we might associate this other view with a group of thinkers that includes, for example, I'll mention just two or three: Edmund Burke, John Adams, Niccolo Machiavelli, the political tribe. Hannah Arendt knew these thinkers and writers well and had an immense admiration for them too, as she did for Augustine. For thinkers like Burke and Adams and Tocqueville, for all genuinely political thinkers, what happens here in time, in what Thomas Jefferson called the ordinary course of events, that's not merely important, It's the most important thing. Indeed, it is the only important thing. And those who lift their eyes up to the beyond, to the world to come, to the life after this one, to the kingdom of God, are not only irresponsible if they make that the measure of their political judgment, but they are a danger, a threat to the survival of the political world itself, which is why Hannah Arendt had such very mixed feelings about the French Revolution, in which she saw some of the seeds, at least, of the modern totalitarianisms that have followed in its course. Adams and Burke and Machiavelli, they were not concerned with eternity at all. Machiavelli once said, God help me, but I love my city of Florence more than I love my own immortal soul. Their concern is not with joy, but happiness instead. For those who do not share Augustine's faith, Augustine's belief in a God beyond this world, or a life after this one, is there any hope for joy in this life and in this world? One of Hannah Arendt's beloved Greek thinkers answered that question with an emphatic yes. I'm referring to Aristotle. For Aristotle, the path of thinking, another subject of immense interest to Arendt, about which she wrote deeply, beautifully. For Aristotle, the path of thinking leads from physics, from the study of the motions of things in the world around us, in the cosmos, as he called it, the system, the orderly whole composed of many different kinds of moving things. The path of thought leads from physics to metaphysics, which asks about ultimate matters, and leads eventually, in the end, to an understanding that the world in which we live, the cosmos, is itself eternal and necessary, that it could not be, that it is as it is and must be as it is, out of a necessity that is demonstrable to reason itself. And in grasping this final and deepest of all truths, the thinker, according to Aristotle, becomes one with the divinity of the world that is the object of his contemplation. Aristotle calls this state of union with the eternality and divinity of the world blessedness, which is Aristotle's word for joy. Is Aristotle's path still open to us today? Is it possible to think one's way to joy? Or is the only path the path that Augustine prescribes, the path of belief, which many, perhaps, me included, find themselves unable to take? The answer to this question is complicated by the fact that Aristotle's philosophy, the path that he offers to blessedness, is burdened by assumptions, deep philosophical, metaphysical assumptions that are no longer acceptable to us today. in which we have no confidence. Indeed, believe that reason has disproven and disowned. For example, Aristotle's conviction that the celestial objects we see circling in the sky are eternal, have always been and always will be. We know that's not the case. Even stars, as the poet Rilke said, in a line that Hannah Arendt was fond of quoting, have time inscribed in their heart. Aristotle believed that the different kinds of things, the different species of things, are immortal too, and we know he was wrong about that. Most importantly, Aristotle thought that individuals, or maybe I should say more precisely, the individuality of individuals, that which makes them distinctive from every other member of their kind, their individuality is nothing. It's not even real. And to think that it is a terrible philosophical mistake. We don't believe that. We think the individuality of the individual isn't only real, but infinitely precious. If we scrap all of these assumptions, no longer credible to us, does the path that Aristotle charts remain open to us at all? Is there a way to think oneself to blessedness? This question has led me, and I will not burden you with the details on this beautiful, blessed morning. It has led me personally to Spinoza, whose name has also been invoked earlier this morning. A thinker who perplexed Hannah Arendt, to whom she felt an attraction, but from whom she also felt, as Roger reminded us in his opening remarks, a certain repulsion. I think Hannah Arendt misunderstood Spinoza. He wasn't the cruel hermit that the story about the flies, which I'd never heard before, might suggest. His great work, The Ethics, read as I believe he would wish us to read it, is a paean to human solidarity. Man is a god to man, says Spinoza, by which he means that we need each other more than anything else in the world if we are to pursue, however fitfully and incompletely, the path of thinking that will bring us never with the finality that Aristotle believed, or Augustine for that matter, who postponed it to the next life, will never bring us to a condition of finality, but one along which we can nevertheless make progress as we trace the steps of our short, mortal careers. And that, Spinoza thought, is itself a kind of joy, the only sort that is ultimately available to us. But one shouldn't be too disappointed by it, because even if we can't have everything we wish, having more of what we long for is enough. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Roger. And thanks for the invitation to be here. Listening to Teju Cole made me want to read more fiction. Just the literary sensibility, as distinct from a sort of politically moralistic sensibility, I think is very attractive right now for its capaciousness. I'm going to talk about gratitude. We feel gratitude when someone does something for us outside the realm of exchange. One wants to market this arrival of something that overflows what is expected and recognize the source of it. In acting outside necessity, our benefactor shines. Or one may feel gratitude without a counterparty to receive it, in response to some fortunate condition that could have been otherwise. Having good health, for example, or good looks, life itself. Something for which we are not responsible, a gift. Whether in response to good fortune or to some identifiable benefactor, in taking note of this gift, one feels that one has regained a proper coordinate system. It's a calm feeling. One shucks off that irritable, constant background sense of not receiving one's due, the sense of a self inflated beyond its true proportions. For it does feel like a little dose of truth, this moment of reorientation. Seeing oneself from the outside as one who receives rather than demands is also liberating from resentment, entitlement, grievance. You feel lighter as well as smaller, and more ready to act with grace toward others, that is, to be larger. For grace and gratitude have the same root, whether one speaking etymologically or psychologically. I think our condition as modern people makes the experience of gratitude especially elusive. So when we feel grateful, it has an effect that's all the more powerful, bumping us out of a deep spiritual rut. And I think it's elusive because we don't have a good frame for understanding it. And that's because it doesn't accord with the grand metaphysical picture that we've set up for ourselves in modern thought, and which is kind of receded into the background, is hard to even make an object of scrutiny. Spelling this out may help us identify the source of our sourness and point the way toward something better. Most simply, gratitude requires that there be another, an outside world that is not under one's control and not of one's own making. Of course, it's simply the case that there is such a world, but there are different ways of responding to this fact. The English philosopher Michael Oakeshott wrote 2 essays, which, if you put them side by side, offer a contrast between 2 personality types. One he called the rationalist, and the other he called the conservative. Now here, conservative doesn't refer to a political ideology. Instead, it names a disposition. What distinguishes the conservative is not hankering after the past, but rather affection for the present, for what actually exists. He has an eye for all the ways his surroundings afford a good life, or provide raw materials for the building of such a life. He wants to preserve the present world, not out of fearful, small-minded rejection of the possible, but because he has a greater awareness of the resources of the actual, which may be lost if we're not careful. In other words, he feels gratitude for the world and a sense of obligation to it. The rationalist, by contrast, looks at the world and is offended by the waste, the inefficiency, the chaos, the suffering, the grotesque failures of optimization, and wants to set it right. He has a vision of a better world, and that is where he lives, in devotion to his vision. Probably you need both types to have a healthy society. Our own time has seen the emergence of a third type, the transhumanist, who's maybe just an over-the-top caricature of the rationalist. Like most caricatures, it brings into relief the defining features of the original through exaggeration. From the beginning of the modern rationalist project, the body has been the thorn in the side of it. The creative freedom of the will is compromised by its entanglement with a body subject to natural necessities not of one's choosing, from one's sex to mortality itself. But if we reconceive the body as raw material and make man himself a technological project, then we can escape this subjugation to necessities that impinge from outside the will. But you don't have to look to the exotic fringe of transhumanism to see this. The whole movement of the present is to bring the world under rational control. For example, substituting algorithms and mechanized certainties for the frailties of human judgment, as in the push for driverless cars and whatnot. Or replacing the unclean clamor of democratic politics with expert administration. We may even take up this approach in relation to ourselves. For example, when we seek to eliminate the element of chance and serendipity in love through dating apps that seek to optimize the search process and make it more efficient and systematic. A life fully under control is a life from which the possibility of serendipity has been excluded. Serendipity is perhaps the secular name for grace. Further, something under one's control can't be an object of love, as it isn't really other to the self. So consider the relationship you might have with a robot dog, the appeal of which, of course, is that it has an off switch, and it won't take a dump on your carpet. So the ideal seems to be a kind of frictionlessness between you and this thing, very distinct from a real relationship with a real dog. The imperative to gain control flows from the ideal of autonomy, the literal meaning of which would be to give a law to oneself. Kant understood it as the opposite of heteronomy, which means being subject to necessities outside oneself. If we give due attention to the experience of skilled action, it can give us some critical distance on the ideal of autonomy. Consider music, for example. One can't be a musician without learning to play a particular instrument, subjecting one's fingers to the discipline of frets or keys. The musician's power of expression is founded upon a prior obedience. Her musical agency is built up from an ongoing submission. To what? Well, to her teacher, maybe, but there's such a thing as the self-taught musician. Her obedience, rather, is to the mechanical realities of her instrument, which in turn answer to certain natural necessities of music. So if you take a string under a given tension and you have the length, it raises the pitch by an octave, things like that. These facts do not arise from the human will, and there's no altering them. Progress and excellence is only possible if one is capable of enduring a lot of tedium and frustration. I think the example of the musician sheds light on the basic character of human agency altogether, namely that it arises only within concrete limits that are not of our own making. These limits need not be physical. The important thing is rather that they're external to the self. So consider the experience of learning a foreign language, beautifully described by Iris Murdoch. She says, if I'm learning, for instance, Russian, I'm confronted by an authoritative structure which commands my respect. My work is a progressive revelation of something that exists independently of me. Attention is rewarded by knowledge of reality. Love of Russian leads me away from myself toward something alien to me, something which my consciousness cannot take over, swallow up, deny, or make unreal. In the Platonic tradition, one speaks of such striving as an erotic phenomenon. We are drawn out of ourselves toward beauty. I'm reminded of my friend Tal Brewer describing listening to Billie Holiday sing. She tries different phrasings in a given passage, combining them with subtle inflections of pitch, reaching toward some ideal that isn't fully clear to her as yet, as it comes into view only in the course of her pursuit of it, progressively. In rehearsal, presumably, but even during a performance in real time. To witness this from the audience is exhilarating. The beautiful thing we feel privileged to witness is the music itself, but also the presence of a human being engaged in this striving toward the music that wants to be born. Off stage, as it were, outside the focus of her own attention, which is entirely on the music, but visible to us from the audience, we see that she strives also toward a better version of herself, the one who is approached closer to the perfection of her art by pushing beyond the realm where she's certain of the outcome. You feel you're watching a high-wire act. In his indispensable book, Homo Ludens, Johan Huizinga writes, "To dare, to take risks, to bear uncertainty, to endure tension, these are the essence of the play spirit." Thus understood, play sits uncomfortably with the contemporary taste for order and our attempts to bring the world fully under rational control. So how does any of this bear on the question of gratitude? Affection for the world as it is could be taken as the motto of a this-worldly ethics. To discover the affordances, the possibilities of fit in the world for beautiful human action can inspire wonder and gratitude. Intuitions we associate with religion can arise within a this-worldly ethics of attention. For there does seem to be something benevolent in the disposition of things relative to us. Such are the rules of gravity and buoyancy that surfing is possible. That's the kind of universe we inhabit. Being alert to such possibilities and giving their occurrence in the world their due in wonder, to encounter things in this way is basically erotic, in the sense that we're drawn out of ourselves toward beauty. Such experiences mark the primacy of receiving over making and require a kind of courage, I would say. It's that of entrusting oneself to that which has not been made by oneself and never could be made or controlled, but which supports and makes possible all of our making and doing. If we call such entrusting faith, notice that it has the same spirit as play, to dare, to take risks, to bear uncertainty. I like the example of surfing because the ocean is something truly alien and inscrutable. The surfer throws himself into it. Every wave is unique, a gift that can never recur, and they are exquisite. The surfer receives it and does what he can with it. Rarely does he feel adequate to its possibilities. If he's not in the right spot when it arrives due to a failure of paddling strength, or if he does catch it, he doesn't adequately perceive what this particular wave is going to do and he botches it. Or he has a failure of courage if the wave is big and murderous and he hesitates. Surfing is 95% frustrated eros, for me at least, due to my own limitations. But that other 5%. To watch a Kelly Slater is to be forced to recalibrate one's sense of what a human being can do. So there's one data point, surfing. Another would be, quite simply, the existence of women's breasts. So now we have 2 data points, each of which I think gives proof that there is a God and that he loves us very much. You can pick your own points of reference. The accusation against religion is that it removes us to a different, invisible realm, and is for that reason corrupting. I think that's in Machiavelli. We can take that up. But sometimes you have an experience of God's love saturating this world, and it's essentially psychedelic. You feel you're gaining perceptual access to a layer that was always there beneath your notice. And it shows up as the most fundamental layer of reality, the ground of grounds. Quite preposterously, this turns out to be something like love. The effect of such moments is to place you more fully in the actual. With this comes a renewal of our faculty of gratitude. For I do think it is a faculty, one of those endowments by which a person grasps his true situation. Thank you.
I was resonating sympathetically right on through the entire talk. But when you got to surfing, I nearly burst with joy at the end. Having grown up in Southern California, riding a surfboard from the time I was 10 years old, and still occasionally trying to do it in colder New England waters. We got a lot to talk about there. Michael Oakeshott, Iris Murdoch, Huizinga Dainu, but Kelly Slater on top of it all. Oh my goodness, almost too much for me to take. Might I illustrate Oakeshott's distinction between the rationalist and the conservative, and the bearing of the distinction on the meaning of gratitude with an observation from my own professional life. I teach law students who arrive, most of them, as I would describe them as rationally inclined, if not strongly rationalist in their outlook. They have great plans. They know the world needs to be reformed. It certainly does. They see a way to do it, and the law is going to be their tool. They approach it in an instrumental spirit. And then they begin to study the common law of contracts and torts and property and even constitutional law, and they discover how complex the law is and how complex the life is that the law attempts in its incomplete way to guide and to regulate. And they come quickly to understand and to appreciate that the law is the work of many generations, accumulating slowly through the labor of countless hands, and that they are latecomers to it. And that appreciation, in most cases, grows into a kind of reverence for the gift that they have received and which is now in their hands, for whose preservation and continuing perfection they're responsible. And that is the nursery bed of a kind of gratitude and of the Oakeshottian conservatism that goes with it, which many of my students find themselves shocked to be experiencing, because it runs against the grain of their political beliefs, which are very largely progressive. So this is a difficult transition for them. But the key, and I'll end here, and I would just invite you, Matt, to respond to this. I think it's implicit in what you were saying. The key to the effectiveness and to the success and the reward of the gratitude they feel or begin to feel is their sense that they are able to respond adequately in kind, that they aren't disabled by it, that it isn't a gift so great that you can never do more than thank your lucky stars that you've received it. You have to be in a position to reciprocate, even if reciprocation takes the form of preservation and continuing perfection. And the balance between the two of owing a great deal to those who have made a gift that was unbidden and unimaginable, really, in many ways, and yet being able to pay it forward, as the cliche has it. That symmetry is terrifically important for their sense of balance in the tradition.
Yeah, right. So tradition means that which is handed over or handed down. And I think it's good to make a distinction between a living tradition and a kind of mere antiquarianism. And this really came home to me. So my book, The World Beyond Your Head, is a long chapter about these people who build Baroque pipe organs in rural Virginia. And so they have inherited a number of forms from organ making, back in Germany in the 1600s or whatever, the old masters, and they in fact go to Germany, or did when they were younger, and studied these. They, did service, like maintenance operations on them to learn their inner workings and all that. But in their own work, it emerged. I spent many days just talking to these people about what they do. And it seems like they understand themselves to be engaged in a friendly quarrel with the ancients about how to realize certain goods that are those of musicality. And there's different ways to get there. So there's a shared end. And I like the case of organ making, and maybe you couldn't make this case for every sort of technical practice. But for them, the technical excellence of organ making is, of course, in the service of music. The musical repertoire of the organ, most of it, is in the service of the life of the congregation, that is worship. So it's sort of a nestled set of goods in which each one points to something beyond itself. And I think that kind of teleological feel to it means that, or it's, at least coincides with the fact that these organ makers themselves understand their lives as craftspeople as part of a larger arc, which is the arc of the history of their craft, and they understand their efforts as a going further in the same direction. And so I like that as a kind of reflection on tradition, not as a kind of stupid antiquarian stasis, but something quite different.
I think one. Oh, I'm sorry, Karen. Yes.
So I'm just wondering for time we should. It's okay. So I have questions for each of you, and I'm going to actually probably give them to you both quickly so we can respond as you'd like, because I do want to have us, still have time for question and answers. For Tony, my question really has to do with Augustine, who is one of my favorite people in the world. And I very much kind of recognize what you say about his emphasis upon, what he calls the peregrinatio, that kind of life as a pilgrimage, kind of returning to our true home, which is with God. He has this distinction between the sign and the thing, and he says that everything in life is a sign that you must use to get to one thing, and there's only one thing, which is God. And he actually does use the word joy in reference to that. The thing, the race, is that in which you take joy, and there's only one thing, which is God. Everything else is pointing you to that. So I think that very much fits with your reading of him. But I also think that Augustine is very much a political thinker, right? I mean, he comes up with the idea of the just war. He has this beautiful passage about how can you be a judge when you might get it completely wrong and execute an innocent person. And so much of his kind of pages are about how you kind of live in this fallen world. And, that is the challenge. I mean, we right now we're living, Christians are kind of, hope they're living in the city of God, but they're living in the city of man. So I'm just kind of wondering how that kind of fits in, because it doesn't seem to be black and white, kind of with him. With Matt, my question for you is, I love what you say about gratitude, and I can very much understand the idea of kind of gratitude for something, and I think a lot of what you've talked about is kind of what, this sensation of gratitude, for, can I say, the blessings if we have, something that's outside our control, something that's not of our making. But I wonder about, can you have gratitude without gratitude to someone? You mentioned kind of grace. You don't use the word blessing, but that could also kind of fit in. So I am wondering about, is there a secular way of describing what you're talking about? Can you be fundamentally grateful without some notion of God or some equivalent to God? So those are my two questions, and maybe we can respond quickly to them, and then I do want to open it up to other people.
Okay, with respect to Augustine, Augustine was a brilliant political thinker. He wrote about power and war and a whole range of political topics with great depth and originality, for sure. Here's how I see it. We're pilgrims. The human communities that we inhabit are hostels of sorts, where we live for a time as we pass through the world on the way to our reward. We have to keep the hostel in good repair for our own sake and for the sake of our fellow human beings. We are enjoined by God to do so. God commands us to pay attention to the condition of the temporary home in which we live in our transient condition. But never mistake the hostel with your true home. That would be a spiritual error of the gravest kind. So what's required, Karen, is a kind of bifocality. On the one hand, you have to be attuned to, appreciative of the need to keep this human thing in decent repair, but at the same time remind yourself constantly that it's not for the sake of that human thing, ultimately, that you are obligated to do so, but rather for the sake of an end which lies beyond the horizon of all human preoccupations. And that's where Augustine differs so profoundly, spiritually, from every genuinely political thinker. I mentioned three. The list is obviously a lot longer than that. The political thinkers have settled down and made the world their home in precisely the way that Augustine says is the doom of the soul.
Yeah, you're saying that maybe gratitude without a sort of identifiable recipient is ultimately kind of incoherent. And it was dangerous reflections along those lines that led me, anyway, toward religious faith. I mean, it was something I was, in part, rationally compelled toward. That these intimations we have of, at times, of wonder, of the goodness of being itself, I think you have to get somewhere in the idea of love and the world made out of love. Of course, in the at some point, I guess I can't even remember whose talk. I think it was Roger's talk. Referred to Nietzsche's amor fati, love of fate, and I was doing a seminar recently. We read Genealogy of Morals with a bunch of Catholic seminarians, which is probably not done very often. And what I was kind of hung up on with amor fati is I can understand reconciling yourself to fate. I can understand a kind of fatalism, which I think is usually healthy. But to love your fate seems to imply some kind of benevolence. It can't be simply tough-minded. I'm so tough-minded, I can love it. That seems kind of juvenile, ultimately. Anyway, that's a side quarrel. Can we maybe, I'm into this Augustine thing, can I chime in?
Very quickly, but I do want to, okay.
Okay, so, right. So Machiavelli says, forget about these imagined principalities. To get sort of otherworldly in your moral orientation is corrupting, and furthermore, it gives the world over to prey and criminal men who sort of use priestly authority to manipulate. All of that is a typical modern complaint. I like you said use the word. I use the word stereoscopy. You used a slightly, almost the same word, this idea that the immanent and the transcendent are actually deeply intertwined, and that to have this notion of the transcendent provides a kind of stereoscopy that provides depth perception for your apprehension the present, of the actual. So it's not a separate realm, but one that reverberates in and suffuses the actual and the present.
Okay. Thank you. So questions? Yes, one of you in the maroon sweater.
This question is for Crawford. You were talking about transhumanism and the idea of sort of people who want to replace humanity with a machine, and that made me think of, to some extent, humans in themselves. Everyone in this room, and that exists, is a machine. A biological machine that our, brains and our emotions are chemical exchanges, and that we are, evolutionarily have been engineered in sort of a way to function. How does that reconcile with sort of your beliefs about humanity, and how does that work with what you were saying? Thank you.
Okay. Well, first I have a degree in physics, so I'm not anti-science. But I think ultimately materialism is incoherent. I think, if you get into the weeds of that, that's where you arrive at. But there's certainly a real attraction to thinking of the human as a machine. And so what's the source of that attraction, despite its ultimate incoherence intellectually or metaphysically? And I think it's that it promises to render man as a kind of self-making project, right? So, so we have some vision of what life should be, and we're going to get there. First of all, Silicon Valley is solving death. They actually use that phrase. So that removing any kind of given limits, without which I think, I don't know, it seems like a boring eternity of lovelessness or something. But I think one has to sort of psychologize the insistence that it's all atoms all the way down. I'm skipping the substantive argument for why that's not an adequate view. But if you don't want to do that substantive work, you can at least keep in your head, like, why is this so appealing to us? And I think it has to do with this ideal of autonomy that I mentioned, giving a law to oneself.
And if I could just add to that, of course, the final accomplishment would be the overcoming of death itself. We'll engineer ourselves out of our own mortality. But think how much we'd lose if we could. Remember what Socrates said about philosophy. Philosophy is a preparation for death. If there's no death, there's no philosophy. Remember what Wallace Stevens said about beauty. Death is the mother of beauty. Without death, there's no beauty, there's no art, there's no poetry.
Okay. Yes.
On that point, I think in the thought diary, she wrote something like, death is a price we pay for having lived, and she invited us not to pay too much importance to death. So I always thought, reading her, that if there is transcendence in her work, it's the transcendence of origin, where we come from, the natality, not... And in that sense, she really stands in front of the whole philosophical tradition. So my question to you is, yes, what do you do of this focus on beginnings and natality, which is the transcendental, in my view, but is it your view as well that this importance of beginning and natality is transcendental in Arendt's work?
This is a central striking theme in Arendt's thought, the idea of natality, that every birth is a fresh beginning, a miracle. She associates this too with Augustine. It's a powerful idea, and it does reverse the field of attention from the preoccupation with death as the fundamental orienting fact, which was, of course, the way her beloved teacher, I use the word in the full complicated sense, Martin Heidegger tended to approach things. And she's looking at it from the other end of the telescope. But that is only half of the picture as Arendt saw it, I think. But remember, she also says every child is a new beginning, a miracle, but also a danger, a threat to the world itself and its necessary standing routines, and has to be introduced to them, has to be educated. The miracle has to be tempered so that the world stands and continues. And that is the Burkean traditionalist conservative side of Arendt, which is a complement to the radical Augustinian natalist side. And both sides have to be there to get the full picture as she saw it.
Very briefly, I forget the name of the poet who said, to have children is to say yes to your own death. So that nicely combines the natality and the sort of being toward death that Heidegger talks about.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, there. Okay, this one, okay.
Thank you. I was wondering, in the first talk, you talked about how there's a distinction between joy and happiness, and that happiness is kind of tainted with this sadness because it's fleeting. I was wondering what you thought of the idea that the fleetingness of happiness is what gives it value, and that there's value in, you know, happiness not existing forever because you need something to contrast happiness.
Yes, that's a really important observation. I described the sense of fleetingness that accompanies every happy moment as the sadness at the heart of happiness. But that's not quite right, or it's not the whole truth. Better to describe it as a kind of bittersweetness. There's a sadness to it, but also the knowledge that it is passing and will pass is what enlivens it and gives the happy moment, so long as it endures, its gusto, its vitality, the passion of the moment. And without that, the shadow of transience, the happy moment wouldn't be as happy as it is, or happy in the way that we experience our human happinesses when they come. But I would still insist, maybe insist is too strong a word, I would still want to draw a distinction between happiness, so conceived, and joy, from which that bittersweet element is missing or is not present to the same degree.
Yeah, when you brought that up in your talk originally, I thought, okay, so both happiness and joy are transient moments, but you seem to be saying that joy somehow exists outside of time. So it's like an experience of resonance with some good that exists outside of time. And so there was a popular book maybe 10, 15 years ago. It was quite good. It's called All Joy, No Fun. It was about parenting. And it's like, yeah, it's a major drag being a parent, but also it kind of lends this depth of meaning to your life that is kind of transcends those moments, and yeah.
Yeah, Wordsworth wrote a beautiful poem. It's one of my favorites, called Intimations of Immortality. How many, any of you know it? You must know this poem, yes. And it's about many things, but among them, centrally about the glimpse, the intuition, the brief but unquestioned encounter with what goes beyond our categories of temporality in a moment, which itself, of course, comes and goes. But what we see or grasp or think we see or grasp in that moment isn't confined or cabined by time at all.
On that note, I'm afraid we're going to have to end. Please join me in thanking our speakers. Thank you.